Have you ever noticed how your mind never seems to rest, even when your body does? You replay conversations, predict disasters, and plan for problems that don't even exist yet. That's not wisdom, that's warfare in the mind. The truth is, overthinking isn't about being careful, it's about being afraid. And the more you try to control everything, the further you drift from peace. But God never called you to be your own savior. He called you to trust Him. This message will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith and control. It's not another think positive talk. It's a wake-up call for the weary, the anxious, and the exhausted. You'll discover why your mind feels like a battlefield and how surrender, not strategy, unlocks divine peace. Because the real victory isn't found in figuring everything out. It's found in letting go and walking by faith. So before you scroll away, take a second and ask yourself, what would happen if you finally stopped fighting your thoughts and started trusting God's voice? Leave your answer in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear what you've learned through your battles. Overthinking is like trying to swim with your clothes on. You move, but you never get anywhere. It drains peace, sleep, and joy until even small things feel heavy. People often replay conversations in their heads, wondering what they could have said differently, as if changing a memory could change the outcome. But God never designed the human mind to carry the weight of the world. He designed it to walk by faith, to rest in God's promises, and to find peace in His presence. The truth is, overthinking often disguises itself as wisdom, when in reality it's fear in a clever costume. The mind tries to control what only God's sovereignty can handle. Every what if becomes a tiny battlefield, a mental warfare between trust and anxiety. The moment a person believes they must have all the answers, clarity vanishes and faith fades. That's why learning to let go isn't weakness, it's spiritual discipline. It's choosing obedience over clarity even when everything feels uncertain. Yet the heart longs for freedom. Deep down, people crave stillness, that quiet moment when God's voice silences the chaos. Imagine this. Instead of trying to solve every problem before bed, you whispered, "Lord, I surrender this to you." That simple act of trust can shift an entire night from anxiety to divine peace. It's in those moments of surrender that the soul begins to taste true rest. And that's where the illusion starts to show itself. Most people think control brings peace, but it's actually the thief that steals it. The harder we try to manage every detail, every outcome, every person, every possible failure, the tighter anxiety grips us. Fear whispers that if we don't plan for every scenario, disaster will strike. But faith says, even when I can't see, I'll trust God. The truth is, God isn't impressed by our strategies. He's moved by surrender. He doesn't need your backup plan. He needs your obedience.
Trying to control everything is like holding sand in your hand. The more you squeeze, the faster it slips away. It's a form of spiritual warfare disguised as responsibility. When we try to fix what only God's will can direct, we step out of alignment with His timing. And when God's timing is off in our eyes, frustration grows, making us forget that waiting is not punishment, it's preparation. To walk by faith means releasing the illusion that you're the one keeping your life together. Those who live by faith over fear understand this paradox. True freedom comes from letting go. It's not laziness, it's trust. It's not passive, it's spiritual discipline. When you loosen your grip, God's provision finally has room to flow. Sometimes the biggest breakthrough happens not when you fight harder, but when you worship as your weapon. And right when you learn to release control, you begin to see how the battle was never really outside. It was always inside your mind. Every battle begins long before it shows up in real life. It starts in the mind. The enemy knows he doesn't have to destroy your body if he can first exhaust your thoughts. That's why overthinking is one of his most subtle weapons in spiritual warfare. He plants fear, doubt, and endless what-ifs until your faith feels small and your peace feels distant. But this isn't just overthinking, it's a strategic attack meant to keep you distracted, restless, and powerless in God's presence. The mind is a battlefield where obedience and control wrestle daily. One thought says, "I can handle this." Another whispers, "Surrender it to God." Whoever wins that moment decides the direction of your day. That's why spiritual transformation starts with a renewed mind, one that refuses to feed on fear and instead feeds on faith. When you choose trust over understanding, you shut down the lies that say you're not enough. Those are not God's voice, they're noise from an enemy terrified of your potential. And here's the twist. The devil doesn't fight those who are standing still. He targets those walking toward purpose. If your thoughts feel like a battlefield, it's because your destiny is worth defending. The moment you replace panic with praise and confusion with worship, the atmosphere of your mind shifts. Suddenly, the same thoughts that drained your strength begin to bow under God's authority. That's when the battle begins to turn, and the mind starts learning the power of submission. When the mental battle feels loud, submission becomes the key to silence. You can't fight overthinking with more thinking. That's like trying to put out fire with gasoline. The only way to win the war in your mind is to surrender it to the one who created it. When fear starts whispering worst-case scenarios, prayer becomes the language of victory. The moment you say, "God, I can't fix this, but I trust you," the storm in your thoughts begins to settle, and divine peace takes over.
Submitting your thoughts isn't passive, it's powerful. It's saying, "Lord, you lead, I'll follow." And when you do, the Holy Spirit begins to filter your mind. Worries turn into worship, and confusion turns into clarity. Suddenly, you realize that obedience doesn't always bring instant breakthrough, but it always brings alignment. And that spiritual alignment is what positions you for God's timing, the kind that always arrives right on purpose. Each time you trade control for trust, the atmosphere of your inner world shifts. You begin to notice that faith over fear isn't just a phrase, it's a way of living. It means letting go of your need to predict, plan, or panic, and choosing instead to worship as a weapon. Peace doesn't come from solving everything. It comes from submitting everything. And right there, in that quiet surrender, something begins to change deep within. God doesn't move because of anxiety. He moves because of faith. Many people think if they pray harder, worry longer, or plan smarter, things will change faster. But God's provision isn't unlocked by panic, it's unlocked by trust. The kingdom doesn't operate on emotional effort, it operates on spiritual alignment. When a person finally stops striving and whispers, "Lord, I surrender," the heavens respond. That moment of surrender is when divine peace begins to rebuild what fear once tore apart. Total surrender doesn't mean doing nothing, it means doing everything through faith. It's the difference between running aimlessly and walking in God's timing. When you release the need to control, you make room for God's wisdom to guide you. It's like switching from a flashlight to the sun. What once looked impossible suddenly becomes clear. Miracles rarely happen in chaos. They happen in stillness, in that quiet space where the heart chooses trust over understanding. Those who live surrendered discover a rhythm the world can't explain, a rhythm of peace in the storm and strength in weakness. They learn that obedience doesn't cost freedom, it creates it. Faith over fear becomes more than a slogan, it becomes oxygen for the soul. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, you start to see worship not as a song, but as a lifestyle. A constant reminder that victory doesn't come from holding on tighter, but from finally letting go. Peter's story isn't just about walking on water. It's about walking by faith. For a moment, he did the impossible. But the second he shifted his focus from Jesus to the waves, fear took the lead and he began to sink. That's exactly what happens in the mental battle. When our eyes fix on God's presence, there's peace. But when they shift toward the problem, overthinking takes over. Faith doesn't deny the storm, it just refuses to make it the focus.
The enemy doesn't always need to sink your boat. He just needs to steal your focus.
That's why spiritual warfare often begins with distraction. A thought here, a worry there, until you realize you're drowning in anxiety while Jesus is still standing on the water, reaching for you. God's sovereignty doesn't change just because your emotions do. He's still in control, even when you're not. The problem isn't the storm, it's where your faith decides to look in the middle of it. Every time Peter looked back at Jesus, he rose again, not because the waves stopped, but because trust became stronger than fear. That's what spiritual transformation looks like, not the absence of chaos, but the presence of divine peace in it. And maybe that's the real miracle, not that Peter walked on water, but that Jesus still reached out when he sank. Because every time we lose focus, God's voice still calls us back, saying, "Keep your eyes on me." Every day we stand at a crossroads, one path paved with fear, the other with faith. Fear tells you to calculate, control, and panic. Faith whispers, "Be still and trust God." The hardest part isn't hearing the difference, it's choosing the right one when life feels uncertain. That's where spiritual discipline comes in. Choosing faith over fear isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily surrender. It's waking up each morning and saying, "Lord, I'll walk by faith, not by sight." Fear loves to exaggerate the storm. Faith reminds you of the one who commands it. Fear paralyzes, but obedience mobilizes. When we choose trust over understanding, we stop fighting battles that were never ours to win. God's timing doesn't bend to our anxiety. It unfolds through our surrender. And once you realize that peace isn't the absence of problems, but the presence of God's authority, the noise of worry starts losing its power. The truth is, spiritual freedom doesn't come from control. It comes from worship as a weapon. It's praising in the middle of pain, thanking God before the miracle, and believing even when nothing makes sense. Each act of faith rewrites the narrative fear tried to tell. Because in the kingdom, the real victory isn't avoiding the storm, it's walking through it with your eyes fixed on God's promises. At the end of the day, your mind doesn't need another plan, it needs peace. Every thought you surrender becomes a step toward freedom. Every time you choose faith over fear, the walls inside your heart start to fall. God never asked you to understand everything, He asked you to trust Him through everything. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you truly believed God's promises? What if you stopped analyzing and started worshiping? What if you chose obedience over clarity? The peace you've been searching for isn't hiding, it's waiting for your surrender. If this message spoke to your heart, share it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Your breakthrough could be someone else's freedom.